Klaus Scharioth, it's great to have you back at the Institute, a friend of the Institute for many years when you were here as ambassador, now Dean of the McCotter School and a professor also at Fletcher, which is a great opportunity to see you as often as we can. We had a conference yesterday that you were part of, and it was basically about Afghanistan, what lessons can be learned. You are a polished veteran of the diplomacy of Germany, and you've seen Germany go through what I think we both agree has been an enormous set of challenges, starting in 2001, then moving on and staying in Afghanistan for these 14 past years, sometimes against public pushback. Now we've got another challenge in Syria and ISIS, and Germany just made a decision to get involved in that with troops and with reconnaissance air cover. Before that was done, do you think that Germany, and that would also apply to the United States, but Germany thought about the lessons of Afghanistan sufficiently, and then you can tell us what you think they are, to be able to avoid some of the mistakes that obviously were made along the way in the last 14 years in Afghanistan, not just by Germany, but by the United States in particular. So I guess I'm getting around to lessons learned from Afghanistan, but pointing you at what do we do now in this crisis we are facing today?
First of all, Jack, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here, and I must say I very much appreciated the cooperation with AICGS while I was ambassador, and I know from my successors they feel the same way. So thanks again for doing all the good work.
Thank you.
I think what was special about the conference yesterday was that we did a lessons learned exercise, Americans and Germans together. Yeah. And we also had some Afghan people there. And I think so far, we, of course, in Germany have done our lessons learned of Afghanistan, and you have done your lessons learned of Afghanistan in the United States. But I think it is absolutely crucial to do it together because there might be slightly different nuances. As far as your question is concerned, as Syria, Germany and Syria, we have, of course, thought very hard about making this decision, sending 1,200 troops and 6 tornadoes there and all of that. And of course, the lessons learned in Afghanistan played a role. But I would say, let's not concentrate on lessons learned for the future of Afghanistan, but let's concentrate on what have we learned in those 14 years, which were more successful than many people think in Afghanistan, for the future, for future crises, for instance, Syria. But there might be also other things, like what do we do about ISIL? What do we do about other crisis management challenges? And so I think this is extremely useful, not only by looking back and drawing on certain lessons we have learned for Afghanistan, but in general. Of course, always you have to be very clear that each solution has to be country specific. Right. Problems are always slightly different, but I think there are some rules which we can apply, and that's what I tried to say yesterday with my 10 points. I think there are some rules which we can learn which are in general applicable.
Okay, give me a few of those. I know you laid out 10, but give me 2 or 3 of them that you thought were absolutely on the top of the list.
I think one top of the list is try to be as multilateral as possible. And I think we are doing that in Syria. For instance, we are not only inviting the Russians to take part in the Vienna process, but also Saudi Arabia and Iran, which wasn't easy. And I think if we ever begin to think about working against ISIL, I think we should not also begin to talk with the Russians, but also, for instance, with the Chinese. So I think let's try to start with our friends, that's the United States first for Europe, but then also widen the net. That would be one. Okay. Try to be as multilateral as possible. Second one would be you always need a political process. Vienna. Don't have to explain that more. Third, I think you need strategic patience. Extremely important, because I think democracies have a tendency to live in election cycles. And therefore, we have to be very, very careful to really think about it hard, that we don't begin things we are not going to end. And so we always have to ask ourselves, do we have the strategic patience to also bring operation to a successful end? And then I would say another very important thing is that don't create too over-ambitious expectations. And you see, this is true for the country in this case, Afghanistan, in the future Syria or whatever, but also at home. Because you see, democracies also make the mistake to make it palpable to the population, to Congress, to Parliament, to convince them to say yes to such an operation, which costs money and sometimes lives. And therefore, you always try to say, maybe expect a little bit too much. And I think we shouldn't do that, because disappointment follows certainly, and we should avoid that in the future.
One of the things that was said yesterday by a colleague of yours from the embassy, and I think others echoed it, is that Germany and the United States have worked exceedingly well in Afghanistan together. As a matter of fact, one person went so far as to say, of all of the different areas in which Germany and the United States have worked, that is a very good example. I assume you agree with that, but can you tell me why? Because I think that Germany has been there right from the start. You have been there the longest with us in Afghanistan. Germany has. And I think it might be just because of the fact that for 14 years we've been cooperating and we've got a way of talking with each other, whereas other countries have pulled out, they've left and so forth, but you have stayed the course. But that was not exactly easy at home. I mean, every year you had to extend that mandate in the Bundestag, and every year you did it. But it wasn't easy, was it? I mean, sometimes there was some pushback.
No, it was not easy at all.
Yeah.
And I think, you see, we believed it was not a wise decision not to use NATO in the very beginning. We thought, why use the Fiat and not the Mercedes and leave the Mercedes in the garage? NATO is the Mercedes. And so I would always have argued for using NATO from the beginning. And I think it was a mistake to have two separate operations. One which was basically by a leading nation, led a coalition, not NATO, until 2003, and also then the US-led Enduring Freedom operation. I think it was very good that we could put those two things together. And I think that it really began to further improve our operation when our cooperation became closer and closer, the American and the German cooperation. And I thought it was a unique sign that for the very first time after NATO has been created, the United States was ready to have US soldiers serve under the command of a foreigner.
Right.
In this case, a German.
Yeah.
And you see, we thought that was the ultimate compliment. And I think that is something very, very important, because that was always one of the US caveats. All the countries have caveats, but the US had the caveat, we never serve under a non-US commander. And so I thought that was a very good thing. And I think in many instances, we had extremely good cooperation between the German and the US side. It was, at the beginning, we had different approaches. And so we had to learn from each other. But I think we were very successful.
Now, when you ratchet forward now, and we'll be working now together in another location, the Syria battle against ISIS or ISIL, one would assume that that will also require that strategic patience. Americans are quick to want to use a big hammer if we can to get the job done, and our staying power isn't always what it should be, perhaps. But I'm going to ask you a question that you may not expect. We are going to have to deal with this in Afghanistan for a longer period of time. Your minister, von der Leyen, just said we're going to stay.
Right.
And Obama has switched his policy. So we're going to be there together for a while.
Right.
But we're also going to be together over here in this other region, in this other theater. Let me ask you this. Germany is now facing a huge influx of refugees. 1 million this year alone. Some of them are Afghanis, but a lot of them are from Syria, obviously. Do you think that that issue will get in the way of the decision that Germany has made to go into yet another theater, this time against the battle of ISIS? Do you think that'll get in the way of the political debate in Germany, as it is in the United States, about the concern that, A, that would be stretching out our military forces even further, boots on the ground, and secondly, the fear of terrorism? Do you think that that will cause a problem for Chancellor Merkel to push this through?
No, I don't think it will get into the way because the problems are linked. And you see one thing which we learned the bitter way already in the Balkans, and which we then perfected later on during the Afghanistan experience, is that military action alone never suffices. You always need a comprehensive approach. Right. A comprehensive approach which combines military measures, especially in the beginning, then peacekeeping, less hard, but then also economic measures, job creation, infrastructure, education, health. You see, and this was in the beginning not well coordinated. In the Balkans, for instance, we started this so-called stability initiative after the Kosovo War, and without that, I think it would have been a disaster. So we are learning, and I think one of the key lessons to learn is to have an integrated approach. An integrated approach, military, intervention, also peacekeeping, and all these other things, humanitarian, job creation, economic, and education measures. Now, on Syria, I think the whole thing is linked because Syria is one of the most important root causes for the huge flow of refugees. You have not only 1 million people in Germany, you have about a little more than 2 million in Turkey, you have lots of people in Jordan, you have lots of people in Lebanon, and I think we really have to address first in those countries, help them with a huge amount of refugees, economically, give them money, help them to educate those people so that they don't get discontent and they don't destabilize the countries. Imagine a destabilized Jordan would be a catastrophe, would be a disaster. And in Germany, we know that we first of all have to fight the root causes. That's one is Syria. Another one is ISIL. You know, people who come to Germany are afraid of ISIL. Not all of them, but some of them.
Here as well.
Yeah, and therefore you can't just tell them go away. You see, Germany is a special case. If I may explain it a little bit further, we are, I think, probably the only country in the world who have a guarantee in our constitution for those who are politically persecuted to give them asylum, political asylum. But this is only 2 or 3% of those who seek asylum in Germany, every year about 20, 30,000. And we have to protect that right because it's key. It's what we learned from the Nazi period. It's absolutely key. In addition to that, you have the refugees covered by the Geneva Conventions, and that is a different thing. And that applies to all the members of the Geneva Convention. This is about 35–40% of the people who arrive in Germany, and there, of course, we have to work together. All people have to take on and take in some of those refugees, and therefore we try to push that inside Europe, inside the European Union. But of course also we would very much appreciate US help on stabilizing these other countries, the root causes, and also on the refugee, on the Geneva question. Now, I think as they are linked, these problems, and also not only Syria, but also ISIL and refugees is all linked because they all reinforce each other.
But do you worry a little bit about the appearance of the, we would call it in English, blowback in the domestic politics of many countries, not, for example, in France, in Poland, in Hungary, and even in Germany with this Alternative for Germany group? Do you worry that if you continue to have this flow, whether they're legitimate asylum seekers or whether they're refugees, economic or political, would you worry that there would be, is there a breaking point, a tipping point where the inflow of these refugees is going to cause some domestic turmoil that is going to be very difficult for the European solution that you just said is so necessary?
Yeah, no, it will not be easy to convince other Europeans to take some of those people. I think also that what is absolutely key, that you integrate those people into Germany. I mean, those who stay. And that means you have to give them instruction in German. You have to enhance their skills. That means you have to train them. And we figure that probably every refugee who stays needs help of the amount of about 30,000 euro, which is a lot of money. If you have a million people,
right.
that is 30 billion. That's a lot of money. But I think we can do it. I personally, I'm not speaking for anybody else, I'm not speaking for the government or nobody. I personally believe that we should add also to our portfolio an immigration law so that we could point to the fact if you are turned down because you just come here for economic reasons, because that's the majority, that's about 60% of the people come for economic reasons,
Right.
and they have no right to stay. I mean, the first group because of the Constitution, the second group because of Geneva, the third group I think we can't take on because otherwise many countries, I mean, the standard of living is lower than in Germany. So in order to be able to turn them back, you also need to tell them, if you fulfill our criteria for immigration, you have a chance, you can apply. And then I would copy it from the Canadian, from the US, from the Australian or New Zealand system, that you give certain points for certain qualifications. And that for me, but that's just my personal thinking, that would also need to be a part of the solution.
But that solution really has to be European-wide, right? I mean,
it would be great, but I think we should begin in Germany by an immigration law. I mean, we have already certain regulations, not that they don't exist, but an immigration law would publicize that.
Right.
You know, you would have to put it on the website here. That's what you do. And please, if you qualify for those points, apply.
One of the criticisms of from Merkel in saying "Wir schaffen das," we can do this, was that some people said, well, there is no law like you just described, and some person said to me, well, it's good to say we can do it, but she didn't say where, how, and when, and as a result, people felt overwhelmed at the lower levels of government, and they felt, gee, what are we going to do with these people in the backyard? Do you think that you're going to be able to get on top of this during the coming year? It is another year where you might have another million.
I have high admiration for what Chancellor Merkel said, because I think it really, equals our values. I think it's highly admirable. I think the problem is one of the amount of refugees in a very short time. I think, you see, these million people didn't come stretched over 12 months. Most of them came in the last 5 months. And that means you have, every day, you have something like 20,000 people these days, or sometimes 30,000 people. And you see, people, the commune, the municipalities, they are overstretched in just registering, in giving German classes to them. You need teachers for that. And you need to have people who train them in their skills. So the sheer number is a problem. I think we can do it, but it will need to be stretched a little bit along, that we don't have huge numbers every day. But I think we can do it, and I think morally it's the right thing to do.
And a lot of people agree. I mean, Merkel was just made Time Person of the Year in no small measure because of the leadership that she's shown on this issue. At the end of the day, there are some people that once again point to Germany in so many different ways, Klaus, as having taken over the leadership of Europe in terms of dealing with the Euro crisis and now with this immigration crisis. The way I look at it is that that's true, but when we look across the Atlantic, we see really just one person holding up as high as she can the banner of Europe. I remember her saying, if the euro fails, Europe fails. If the euro fails, European Union integration fails. Do you think that there, as a last question, that this issue is a catalyst for more European opportunity here? Because there are some people that say the opposite. It's a catalyst for blowback. Where do you see a light here at the end of the tunnel as far as reigniting the European movement? Because it seems like it's under duress at the moment.
First of all, that she got selected as Person of the Year, well deserved, and of course a huge compliment. Right. I think that this is a huge challenge for Europe, a huge challenge, because, as I said before, the conditions are different in different countries, and so and you have also different population structures in different countries. But I think, like all huge challenges, they also constitute or offer a possible opportunity. Possible. It doesn't mean it has to come that way, but I think that, for instance, the challenge by ISIL might well also put the Europeans closer together, because it would be fallacy to believe it's just one or two or three countries. You know, every country, any country can be the next attack of ISIL, because it's not that difficult. And so I really believe that this huge challenge could also be an opportunity to bring Europeans closer together.
Well, we certainly hope so, because if looking at it from an American perspective, we need as you would say in German, ein handelsfähiges Europa. And again, once again, Germany is in a key leverage position to help make that happen. And all we can do is say, weiter so.
But I would also say, not only, I think, does Europe really try to unite again, but I think what we really need is a very close transatlantic relationship, very close transatlantic cooperation, because only if Europe and the United States, or North America, work together, I think do we have a chance to face these challenges successfully. And I think that we should not forget that. And I think on both sides of the Atlantic, we need each other. We are indispensable partners for each other, and that should also not be forgotten.
Well, let's hope that whoever is on the other end of November 8th of next year is well clear about that.
That's my message to you.
Well, you've just delivered it. Thank you, Klaus. Appreciated being here. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.